I retired on a Thursday in October, and by the following Monday, my daughter had already stopped returning my calls. Not immediately, mind you. It was gradual enough that I almost convinced myself it wasn't happening. First, it was a missed call here, a short text reply there. Busy at work, Dad. Talk soon. Then the visits dried up. Then the Sunday dinners we'd had together for 20-some years just quietly disappeared, like a fire going out when nobody's watching. I'd spent 34 years with BC Hydro, working my way up from a lineman in Kamloops to a senior project manager out of the Burnaby office. Good pension, solid savings, a paid-off house in Coquitlam that I'd bought with my wife Helen back in 1991. Helen passed 6 years ago, breast cancer, caught too late. After that, it was just me, rattling around in a house built for two, with a daughter named Vivian, who lived 40 minutes away in Port Moody and called every Sunday without fail. Until I retired. Then the calls stopped. I told myself she was busy. She had her husband, Preston, and their 2 kids, and Preston had always been the kind of man who kept close count of other people's time. I never warmed to him, if I'm being honest. He had a way of looking at everything in my house with quiet assessment, like he was appraising it. But Vivian loved him, and Vivian was my daughter, so I kept my mouth shut and passed the gravy and told myself I was imagining things. I wasn't imagining things. About 4 months into my retirement, Vivian actually called, not texted, on a Tuesday evening. I was watching the Canucks lose badly and eating reheated soup, and I remember feeling a little rush of warmth when her name came up on the screen. That's a shameful thing to admit. That my own daughter calling me felt like a small gift. She asked how I was doing, how the house was holding up, whether I'd thought about downsizing. That word, downsizing, landed with a particular weight. It's a big place for one person, she said. All those stairs. And the maintenance costs. Dad, it must be a lot to manage on your own. I said the house was fine. I said I liked having the space. I said the stairs kept my knees working, which was true enough. There was a pause, and then she said, "You still handling all your finances yourself?" I said, "Who else would be handling them?" She laughed, but it wasn't quite right, a little too quick. "I just worry, that's all. It's a lot to keep track of. The pension statements, the investments, the property taxes. Some people find it gets overwhelming." I said I'd managed a $12 million infrastructure budget for the provincial government for 9 years, and I thought I could probably handle my own checking account. She laughed again, the same slightly off laugh, and we talked for a few more minutes about nothing much, and then she said she had to get the kids to bed. I sat with the phone in my hand for a while after. The Canucks were still losing. The soup had gone cold. It was my old friend Ray who first said what I didn't want to hear. Ray and I had worked together at BC Hydro for 15 years before he took early retirement, and we'd kept up the friendship. Coffee every second Wednesday at the Tim Hortons on Luke Heed. The occasional round of golf when my back allowed. He was the kind of man who said things plainly, without malice, which was sometimes uncomfortable and always useful. We were sitting with our coffees one Wednesday in January, the parking lot outside gray and slushy, and he looked at me over his double-double and said, "Bob, I probably shouldn't ask this, but are you doing okay?" "I'm fine," I said, "because you seem like a man who's been thinking hard about something he doesn't want to think about." I looked at my coffee. I told him about Vivian's call, about the question about downsizing, about Preston's habit of looking at my things, about the Sunday dinners that had stopped. Ray listened. Then he said, "You know what she's doing, don't you?" I said I didn't want to know. "She's checking whether you're starting to slip," he said, not unkindly. "And if she thinks you are, someone's going to suggest you need help managing things, and then somehow it'll turn into them managing things for you." I stared at him. "She's my daughter. She's also Preston's wife," Ray said. "And I've met Preston." I drove home that afternoon with his words sitting in my chest like a stone. I wanted to dismiss it. I wanted to call it cynicism, paranoia, the kind of dark thinking that comes from too much Tim Hortons and too many years watching people's worst impulses at work. But I also knew, somewhere below the part of me that wanted to believe the best about my daughter, that Ray wasn't wrong. I started paying closer attention. Vivian began calling more regularly after that January conversation. Not to talk, exactly, but to ask things. Had I updated my will recently? Had I thought about a power of attorney? Had I considered whether the house was practical, long-term? Each question came wrapped in concern, in the language of love, in the voice of a daughter who only wanted what was best for her aging father. I answered carefully. I said I had things in order. I said I appreciated her concern. I didn't tell her what I was doing quietly, on my own, in the background, because I had, in fact, started getting things in order, just not in the way Vivian had in mind. I'd called a lawyer, not the one I'd used for the house purchase years ago. He'd retired himself, but a new one, a woman named Patricia Cheng, who came recommended by my financial planner at RBC. She specialized in estate planning and elder law. I sat in her office on a Tuesday afternoon and told her about Vivian's questions and Preston's appraising eyes. And she listened without judgment and then explained, very clearly, the tools available to me. We set up a proper trust, designated trustees. Ray was one, and my nephew up in Prince George was another, who had clearly defined roles that could not be unilaterally overridden. Patricia drafted documents ensuring that any decision about my assets required sign-off from parties who had no financial stake in the outcome. We updated my will completely. I put nothing in Vivian's name that I hadn't explicitly intended for her. I didn't tell Vivian any of this. I just kept answering her calls and saying things were fine. Spring came. The calls continued. And then one Saturday morning in late April, a Saturday I had planned to spend in the garden, finally getting the raised bed sorted, I heard a car in the driveway. I looked out the kitchen window and saw Vivian's SUV. And then I saw another car behind it, a black sedan I didn't recognize. The front door was unlocked. Vivian let herself, in the way she'd always done, but she was carrying a leather folder I'd never seen before. And the man who followed her through the door was not Preston. He was younger than her, late 30s, in a gray suit. He introduced himself with a name and a firm name that I didn't catch fully, because the folder in Vivian's hand had taken all my attention. "What is she doing here?" I almost said it out loud before I realized I'd mixed up the pronoun. I looked at Vivian. "Who is this?" "This is a solicitor," Vivian said. She used that word deliberately. Solicitor, formal, legal. I wanted him to be here because I think it's time we had a serious conversation about some important decisions. Decisions about what? About the house, Dad. About the estate. About making sure everything is organized properly before. She paused. Before what? Before things get more complicated, she said. You're 67. The house is getting older. The market is good right now. And we want to make sure that whatever happens, you're protected and everything is in order. She set the folder on my kitchen table. She opened it. Inside were documents. Property documents. I could see that much. And a form that looked uncomfortably like a transfer of title. "We're not asking you to do anything you're not comfortable with," she said. "But Patricia, the solicitor, can explain everything and make sure it's all done correctly." Patricia. She'd found her own lawyer named Patricia. I almost smiled. I looked at my daughter. I looked at the man in the gray suit who was her solicitor. I looked at the folder on my kitchen table. And then I said, "Vivian, before we go any further, there's someone I'd like you to meet." I walked to the living room doorway and opened it. Ray was sitting in the armchair by the window, his coffee on the side table, watching everything with the calm of a man who had expected this and prepared for it. And beside him, on the couch, with her own folder open on her knees, sat Patricia Cheng. Vivian's face went very still. "My lawyer," I said, "and my friend. They've been here since 9 this morning." Patricia stood and introduced herself pleasantly, professionally. She explained that she'd been retained to manage my estate affairs, and that she had all documentation pertaining to my assets, trust arrangements, and directives. She said it all in the measured, polite tone of someone who has done this before and knows exactly what she's doing. Vivian's solicitor, the man in the gray suit, glanced at the folder Patricia was holding, and something shifted in his posture. He knew what that folder meant. "Dad," Vivian said. Her voice was very quiet now. I wasn't trying to. "I know," I said, and the strange thing was, I meant it, or at least part of it. I didn't think Vivian had woken up one day, deciding to be predatory. I think it had happened slowly, over years, in conversations with Preston, in small persuasions, in the gradual drift of a woman who had always expected to inherit something substantial one day, and had grown impatient with the waiting. That's how it usually works, I think. Not a sudden decision to do something wrong, but a slow slide into it, justified at each step as concern, as practicality, as love. I wasn't trying to go behind your back, she said. No, I agreed. But that's what was happening. The man in the gray suit closed his folder. He said something polite about there being no reason they couldn't revisit the conversation another time, when everyone was prepared. Patricia thanked him, also politely, and handed him a document. A formal notice that she was my legal representative and that all communications regarding my estate should go through her office. He took the document, he nodded, he left. Vivian stayed. We sat at the kitchen table, the two of us, after Ray and Patricia had given us the room. The morning light was coming through the window at that angle that makes the whole kitchen look like an old photograph. Vivian had her hands wrapped around a mug of tea I'd made her, the way I'd made her tea since she was a child. I said, "Your grandfather worked till he was 73. Drove a delivery truck in the Fraser Valley his whole career. When he died, there was nothing left because he needed every cent of it to live on, and nobody thought that was wrong. It was his. He'd earned it." Vivian said nothing. "What I have, the pension, the house, what's in the accounts. I built that over a working life. Your mother helped build it. It's mine to manage and spend, and eventually, yes, pass on. But in the order I decide, and in the amounts I decide, based on what I need for however many years I've got left." I looked at her. "I love you," I said. "That's not the question. The question is whether this family can get through the next 20 years without you looking at your phone while I'm talking and wondering what the house is worth." She started to cry, and I let her, because she needed to, and because I had my own grief about it too. Grief that we'd arrived at a kitchen table, with lawyers and folders, in the first place. Grief for the Sunday dinners. Grief for the version of retirement I'd imagined, where my daughter called because she wanted to talk. But I didn't undo any of the legal arrangements Patricia had drawn up. I'm not naive enough for that. It's been 14 months since that Saturday morning. Things are different. Not fixed. Not the way a broken bone fixes clean and new. More like a fracture that healed crooked but holds. Vivian calls more often now. And some of the calls feel real, the way they used to. She brought the grandkids over in August, and we did the backyard barbecue, the way Helen and I always used to. The kids running through the sprinkler, the smell of cedar from the fence. I finally got around to repainting. Preston was there. He was polite. He helped carry out the lawn chairs. He did not look at my things with that particular assessing look, or if he did, I didn't catch him at it. Ray came too. He and I stood at the barbecue turning burgers in the late afternoon sun, and he said, without looking up, "Not bad. For a man who had to have his daughter's solicitor escorted out of his house." "Not bad," I agreed. Patricia sends me a quarterly update. Everything is in order. The trust is structured exactly as we designed it, and the house remains mine, entirely, for as long as I need it and want it. I still have the occasional night where I lie awake thinking about it. About what would have happened if I hadn't listened to Ray that January. If I'd let the conversations with Vivian drift on, until one day I'd sign something without fully understanding what I was signing. I know people who have, more than I'd like to admit. So I'll say this plainly. The way Ray said things to me when I needed to hear it. You can love your children completely and still protect yourself absolutely. Those two things are not in conflict. Love does not require you to hand over what you built. It does not require you to sign anything you don't understand. It does not require you to confuse guilt with obligation. Your life's work belongs to you, the people who built it with you, your spouse, your friends, the years of early mornings and late nights. They deserve better than to have it redirected by impatience and entitlement dressed up as concern. Get your documents in order. Talk to a real estate and estate lawyer, not one someone else brought to your table. Tell someone you trust what you're doing before anyone else tries to decide for you. The chairs are still on my back deck. The cedars on my the cedar fence looks good. The pension check comes on the last Wednesday of every month. And I go to Tim Hortons with Ray. And the Canucks are still losing. And my life is mine. That's not a small thing. That's everything.